Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, True Crime Tuesdays, where we delve into the horrors of today's society. Today, we are looking at one of the most infamous serial killers of all time, Ted Bundy.
A judge in Miami today followed the jury's recommendation and sentenced Theodore Bundy to die in the electric chair for the murder of two co-eds. Bundy is the 136th person under death sentence in Florida.
Another thing, all my videos are fact-checked and I get all my information from things that police and authorities have released. Just thought I'd make that clear yet again. And one final thing. YouTube analytics show that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you do enjoy today's episode or my videos in general, consider subscribing because it's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always unsubscribe later. So, with all that out of the way, onto today's case. I am going to put a trigger warning on this video as there are mentions of assault, murder and violent methods of death. So anyway, some backstory. Theodore Robert Bundy was born November 24th, 1946 in Burlington, Vermont to Eleanor Louise Cowell, and his biological dad is unknown. However, he was actually raised by his grandparents, whose names were Samuel Cowell and Eleanor Cowell. And yes, his mother was probably named after his grandmother. His mother, Eleanor, had given birth to him out of wedlock, which, as you know, back then was frowned upon. These days it's not that big of a deal, but back then it was a serious thing. Like, you weren't supposed to have children out of wedlock back in the 1940s. So he was born in Vermont, and after he was born, him and his mother moved there. But after a short while, they moved back to Philadelphia, and it said he was told his grandparents were his parents and his mother was actually his older sister. And according to a biography of Ted Bundy, Ted's grandfather had an awful temper and was actually known to be really violent. When he was 3, his mother and him actually moved to Tacoma, Washington, and she worked as a secretary of the church. This is where she met Johnny Bundy, and she actually married him a year after they met. Ted took his stepdad's last name even though they never really got along, and still thought of himself as a Cowell. In his teen years, he was known to be very antisocial and apparently didn't even date while he was in high school. At age 15, he was actually known for burglary and was stealing all sorts, and was a suspect by police for 2 burglaries that happened in the area. For his high school years, he went to Woodrow Wilson High School and finished in 1965, and further went to study at the University of Puget Sound. And yes, I do know I probably said that wrong. So, moving on from the fact that I can't speak, he was transferred to the University of Washington in 1966. However, he dropped out in 1968, 2 years later, taking up several jobs instead. One of them included being a volunteer for the Nelson Rockefeller's presidential campaign. Later, he enrolled in Temple University, Philadelphia, for a single semester or term, depends where you're from. And in 1970, he re-enrolled in the university and got honours in psychology. In 1971, he was employed at a suicide hotline crisis centre in Seattle. In January of 1974, his first known murders began. The first was a young girl aged 18 who he assaulted and attempted to kill in her sleep. And a few weeks after this, he broke into the home of another woman and beat her in the head and carried her away from the scene. She was later found by police with no head. As you can presume, he may have decapitated her. Anyway, in the next 6 months, he killed 8 more women in Washington. This was the same time he was actually working in the Washington State Department of Emergency Services and dating his colleague Carol Ann Boone. In June 1974, there were 2 more reports of kidnapping, but this time it was said he did it in the middle of the day among the public. This was the point where he grew more confident in what he was doing. He no longer did it in the dead of night or where no one was watching. He was now committing crimes in broad daylight, right under people's noses. In the autumn of 1974, Bundy moved to Utah, and he had enrolled in the University of Utah to study law. He continued his murder spree by October, when he kidnapped and killed 3 girls, one of which was the daughter of a police officer who worked nearby. In November, he kidnapped a girl by tricking her into thinking he was a police officer. However, this girl managed to escape. The same day, he killed another girl, but her body was never found. By the beginning of 1975, Bundy had killed 5 more women, 4 from Colorado and 1 from Utah. In August of that same year, Bundy was arrested by police for disobeying traffic rules and not stopping his car when asked by authorities. Police found evidence against him in his car, such as handcuffs, masks, and a crowbar. The police and authorities later realised the car matched the description of the one given by the attack survivor from the year before. 7 months later, on March 1st, 1976, Bundy was sentenced to 15 years for kidnapping. In 1977, he somehow managed to escape prison twice before he could be charged for the murders he committed. Due to the fact he was representing himself in court instead of hiring a lawyer, he'd been granted permission to use the Pitkin County Jailhouse Law Library for research. This is when he made his first escape. He jumped from the second-story window of the jailhouse in an attempt to escape, and he actually did and made a run for it. One thing he did when he escaped the first time was killing 23-year-old Karen Campbell near Snowmass in February 1975. When he was recaptured, he was then charged for first-degree murder due to this, and was transferred to a jail in Aspen to await trial. The second time he managed to escape was due to the fact that he actually lost enough weight to fit through a light fixture in the ceiling of his jail cell. This time he was on the run for several months before authorities caught up to him, but not before he managed to kill multiple people and wreak more havoc on society, putting them even more in suspense than they already were. In 1978, this was during the time he was on the run from authorities, he went to Florida State University in Tallahassee, where he murdered 2 sorority sisters, Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman, and he injured 3 others. The last murder he managed to commit was of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, and he was arrested on February 15th, 1978, and it was probably due to this. During his trial held in Miami, it was said he looked calm, collected and confident. For most of the trial he had one leg up on the chair as if he genuinely couldn't be bothered, and it really didn't faze him at all. It was also around this time he and his then girlfriend Liz broke up, and due to the fact he had several years of law school knowledge, he was very careful about his responses, and sometimes fully controlling the trial and the questions asked by flipping the responses back to the lawyers asking the questions. An example of this was when a prosecutor asked, "Do you recall your testimony in Utah?" And he responded, "I recall testifying in Utah." This response not many people would probably think of on the spot, especially when being sort of investigated for murder. It was very, very calculated. He knew exactly what he was doing by flipping sort of the conversation the way he did. Like, this isn't me trying to defend him. I'm just saying he was smarter than what people thought he was. Like, due to the fact that he had all this knowledge from all the universities he went to, he had, like, psychology background, he had law background. He was calculated, he knew what he was doing. When being, like, in trial and in the courtroom that day. But even due to the fact that he had all this, like, law background, he couldn't escape the stacks of evidence against him, such as when the prosecutor showed a photograph of bite marks on one of the victims, and it was shown to match Bundy's own teeth. This was probably a huge piece of evidence when making their huge verdict against him. This was probably one of the big things they considered. Another huge piece of evidence that was probably severely taken into account was an eyewitness report from a girl in the sorority he wreaked havoc in. She said she saw him enter the house at night, and there was another person who claimed to have seen him leave, and they could easily identify him. And this helped the jury come to a conclusion less than 7 hours later, which, if you think about it, is a pretty fast time considering all the evidence and Bundy's own calculated responses to all these. So at this point, he was convicted of 2 murders and 3 attempted murders, as well as 2 counts of burglary. By the end of the trial, it was decided by the jury, and the judge dropped the bomb on him. Ted Bundy was sentenced to death twice. Just something to point out, you can't really be sentenced to death twice. You can't really kill someone, bring them back to life, kill them again. But just to clear it up, it was probably in case he somehow decided to overturn the evidence against him and somehow managed to weasel his way out of one of the death verdicts he got. And even still, after the first trial, he actually went to trial again for the murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. An eyewitness saw him leading the young girl from the schoolyard to his car. It was also made in evidence that there were clothing fibres from Bundy's jacket on Kimberly Leach's body at the time of her autopsy, and due to all this evidence, he was found guilty yet again and sentenced to yet another death sentence. At this trial, he called Carol Ann Boone to the witness stand, and just a reminder, this was the woman he was working with in Washington State Police Department of Emergency Services, and it was also his ex-girlfriend. And this was the point where things get a little bit confusing, because I don't really know how he got away with this, how this was legal at all. So Boone came up to the witness stand, probably expecting to be interrogated, almost. And in some strange turn of events, he actually proposed to her.
A very positive part of her life. Then the convicted man popped the question.
Carol, do you want to marry me? Yes. I want to marry you. Yes. I do want to marry you.
Bundy went on questioning Boone.
Don't know how that happened, but she actually agreed, and they ended up getting married. And the two actually ended up having a daughter together named Rose Bundy, while her dad was on death row. A few years later, though, the pair actually divorced in 1986. Anyway, back to the fact that he was now on 3 different death sentences. When he heard the 3rd sentence, he simply claimed, "I'm not going to ask for mercy, for I will find it somewhat absurd to ask for mercy for something I did not do. So I will be tortured for, and will suffer for, and will receive a pain for that act, but I will not share the burden for the guilt." He obviously contradicted himself on the eve of his execution 10 years later, and he admitted to 30 homicides, but the actual amount of people he murdered is still unknown. Some people believe it could be up to 100. If that's true, he barely admitted to any at all, and the 30 homicides he admitted to, that didn't make a difference. He was going to die either way. So he thought, why not just get it off my chest, say it, I'm going to die anyway. So on the eve of his execution, he did just that. Going back to his statement in court, I know I'm jumping around a bit, but I thought that piece of information about the eve of his execution was sort of a good thing to say at that point. So the judge actually said something really strange to him. I think it's pretty strange what the judge said to him at this point. The judge in charge of his 3rd murder that he obviously was sentenced to death with, replied to the big statement he said, telling them it's a tragedy for this court to see such a total waste. I think of humanity that I've ever seen in this court. You're a bright young man. You would have made a good lawyer. You went another way, partner. Is someone who's sort of trying to be as unbiased as possible. Like, I can see both different perspectives to this statement. I can see, yeah, maybe he would have made a good lawyer if he'd stuck on that path and didn't do the things he did. But on the other hand, the fact that the judge said that after he murdered people and that information was known at that time, it just seems weird to me. I don't know. Anyway, you guys can voice your opinions in the comments about this one, because I don't really know what to make of it. I think it's a weird thing to say. Anyway, Bundy managed to delay his death by 10 years through a long appeal process and tried to take his case up to the US Supreme Court, but obviously he didn't manage to overturn his death sentence. He died January 24th, 1989 in Rayford, Florida, and was cremated in Gainesville, Florida, which, I took a mental note of this because I was like, Gainesville, that sounds really familiar. Gainesville, Florida was the same place where Danny Rowland murdered 8 people in 1990, which was just a year later. And if you don't know who Danny Rowland is, he was known as the Gainesville Ripper, and he was actually the person who inspired the movie Scream, which came out December 20th, 1996. I don't know if these two things are linked. I'm just going off on a limb here. The fact that Bundy was cremated in Gainesville, so there was some sort of imprint on Gainesville at the time that, oh my god, Ted Bundy's corpse is here in Gainesville. Oh my god. And then a year later, Danny Rowland murdered 8 people and inspired the movie Scream, which came out 7 years after Bundy was cremated and 6 years after Danny Rowland murdered those 8 people. I don't know if them two things are linked, but it just seems weird to me. It really does. Anyway, that was today's episode. I'm trying to shorten these episodes for the next few weeks because, I think I mentioned in the previous video, I am currently on the run up to GCSEs. They start next week and they'll be going for a few weeks. It's next week, the week after, then miss a week, 2 weeks after that. So I don't know how long or short uploads will be. They may be 20-minute episodes, they may be 15-minute episodes. I don't know. It just depends what I have time for. Because there's loads of revision and school stuff I have to do and all that, but I'm trying to keep uploading for you guys because I actually really enjoy doing this. It's a distraction from reality almost. So that's that, and I thought I'd bring this up because in case people decide to complain about the indiscrepancies between video length, I'm just putting this out in the open that I don't know how consistent the video lengths are going to be, but as soon as they're over and I've finished school, they will be all very consistent after that. It's just for the next 2-3 maybe uploads, they will be sort of a bit all over the place. So if you actually enjoyed today's episode and like my content, do leave a like, subscribe, comment. I want to hear you guys' opinion because I've been hearing loads of opinions on my previous videos, and I'm not gonna lie, I really enjoy hearing other people's perspective on things, because in cases like this I believe that it's not the what happened that's the big deal, it's why it happened, and people have different perspectives on that, and I find that really interesting. Also, while you're down there, if you could turn on post notifications, that would also be great, so you guys never miss another upload. And until next time, this was True Crime Tuesdays.